2011 is one of the most bizarre years in NFL history. Despite all the records being set that season, no team had a bigger impact on shaking up the NFL's future than the Indianapolis Colts. But it was for all the wrong reasons. Colts fans were forced to take in the most humiliating and embarrassing football imaginable. The 2011 season was like witnessing their houses being burned to the ground. There was more incompetency going on than valet wrecking a Lambo. In some ways, this team was more embarrassing than the winless Lions just 3 years before them. And that's because of how damn good the Colts had been. Let me explain. From 1998 to 2010, the Colts absolutely dominated the regular seasons, and they got themselves one ring in that time. And that was primarily because of one man. Peyton Manning. If you didn't have the privilege of watching this man play, well, let me tell you, it was like watching a grown man play against kids. Peyton Manning is the closest thing we've had in the NFL to the level of power that LeBron has had as a player. And it makes sense because Peyton Manning made 11 Pro Bowls as a Colt and took home 4 MVPs in that span. And after the Colts had started 2009 14-0 and eventually made their way to the Super Bowl, there was no world imaginable where just 2 years later, the Colts would have the #1 overall pick from being so bad, they would be releasing Peyton Manning, and they would be drafting another quarterback with that pick. Yet, that's exactly what happened. For this to occur, the Colts needed to have an utter collapse of catastrophic proportion. They had to go from one of the most dominant teams in the league to a complete dumpster fire in the span of one season. In other words, they had to go from Peyton to Painter. The 2025 NFL schedule has officially been released, which means that we are one step closer to the next football season. Right now is a great time to plan ahead and get those tickets early, which you can do through today's video sponsor, SeatGeek. With over 28 million downloads, SeatGeek is the #1 rated ticketing app. And even though football season is months away, there's still plenty of things to do throughout the summer. I recently moved across the country and decided one of the first things to do was to go to an Atlanta Braves game, which was dirt cheap and an awesome experience. There are more than 70,000 events every single day available on SeatGeek, which has concerts, sports, festivals, and more. And they put all the tickets across the web into one area, which makes buying easy. Each ticket is rated on a scale from 1 to 10, so look for the green dots. Green means good and red means bad. And you know I came through for you guys. Use my code KTO for $20 off your tickets at SeatGeek. That's $20 off your first purchase with promo code KTO. Make sure to click the link in the description to download the app. Alright, let's get back to the video. So like I said in the intro, in 2010, the Colts were good. They were one of the best teams in the NFL. And by 2012, they were drafting #1 overall because of how bad they were in 2011. So how did things get to this point? Well, let's start at the end of the 2010 season. The Colts were coming off a disappointing playoff loss, and during the offseason, it appeared as if Peyton Manning was going to be a Colt for the long term, after signing a 5-year, $90 million contract on July 30th, 2011. However, as the summer progressed, concerns over his neck post-surgery loomed, and shockingly, Manning was ruled out of the 2011 season opener, ending his consecutive starting streak at 227 games. The only other quarterback on the depth chart was Curtis Painter. This sent the Colts front office into full panic mode. But first, let's give a career breakdown to that point of Curtis Painter. In 2008, Purdue quarterback Curtis Painter was your typical pocket passer. He was 6'3", 225, not that athletic by NFL standards, and he was the 13th ranked quarterback prospect in 2009. He had been an average Big Ten quarterback in college and had been criticized for his inability to play in big games, but he had the necessary size and enough ability to be a late-round developmental prospect. Enter Chris Polian, who had been recently hired as the Colts GM. And you know how he got that job? His dad gave it to him. Yeah, this move proved to be very unpopular later on. But anyways, in his first NFL draft as GM in 2009, he thought, hey, why not take the local kid who played an hour up the road to hopefully be the backup behind Peyton? Oh, and by the way, it's worth noting that he drafted Pat McAfee the following round. Painter started his NFL journey firmly planted on the practice squad, a place where most dreams go to slowly deflate. However, fate intervened. Painter ascended to backup after Jim Sorgi suffered a shoulder injury that would eventually take him out for the rest of the season. This ultimately was a nothing story at the time, since Peyton never missed games, and the team was undefeated. But here's where things take an unexpected turn for Curtis Painter. With 2 games to go in the regular season, and the Colts sitting at an incredible 14-0 record with a lead in the third quarter versus the Jets, head coach Jim Caldwell made an unpopular decision. They had a chance to make history, but instead, he pulled Peyton Manning and a few other key starters, and sent in Curtis Painter and company. And not long after entering the game, this happened.
Play fake. Lost the football. It's loose. Inside the 5-yard line. The Jets cover for the touchdown.
This moment immediately swung the tide of the game. Painter went on to have 2 costly turnovers, and the Colts suffered their first loss of the season. Since the team had locked away the number 1 seed, this result didn't matter as far as playoffs were concerned, which is why the coach pulled the players. In some sense, they wanted to keep the players fresh and healthy for the postseason. However, fans and players like Peyton Manning were pretty pissed about this decision because history was right there. Going undefeated in the NFL is so rare, but you had to wonder if the Patriots going undefeated just a few years prior and losing in the Super Bowl factored into this decision. Then, in the final game of the year, which was meaningless at this point, Painter got extended playtime, and the result? He went 4 for 17 for 39 yards and another 2 turnovers. Normally, a 6th-round pick struggling late in the season when he's put in, as a rookie especially, is totally normal. This happens more often than not. But this wasn't your typical faceplant. This was the faceplant that punctuated the almost perfect season. Painter didn't just have a bad game. He sort of became an NFL meme before memes were a big thing, and this was all thanks to his unique name and, shall we say, memorable performances. Alright, now let's take it back to the start of 2011. So, like I said previously, Peyton Manning was going to miss some time to start the 2011 season, and Painter was the next in line. However, the team clearly wasn't thrilled to have to start Painter, so they made a phone call.
The Colts agreed to terms Wednesday with Kerry Collins. The veteran quarterback comes out of retirement to join the Colts.
So old man Kerry Collins came out of retirement to start for the Colts. He ended up starting 3 games. And the results? They lost all 3. And in the third one, in the fourth quarter, he exited the game due to a concussion. This meant that the inevitable Curtis Painter came out to play for the Colts once again. And deja vu struck.
Who's in front of the dive, and it gives Painter an opportunity to throw, and instead a fumble, and Polamalu will take it into the end zone.
After being immediately stripped for a touchdown, Painter did put together a drive to tie the game up, but they did end up losing. As if things hadn't been going bad already, Colts fans were given an all too familiar reminder of how their perfect 2009 season came to an end. And this was just the beginning of the Curtis Painter experience.
The Buccaneers taking on the Colts on Monday Night Football.
Monday Night Football, a program that featured 13 million viewers weekly in 2011, featured Curtis Painter making his NFL debut start as the main headliner. And Painter, on cue, did what he had become known for.
3 and out. Curtis Painter hit, loses the football, recovered by Michael Bennett.
But after that, things changed course a bit. Apparently, Pierre Garçon decided to turn on game breakers for the first half, as he took an 87-yard pass to the house, and then sliced and diced through the Bucs defense on a screen pass for another long touchdown. But outside of those 2 amazing plays by Pierre Garçon, the rest of the game was pretty mediocre for Curtis Painter. Although he racked up 281 yards, he finished the game with a 43% completion percentage, which puts you pretty much at the bottom of the league statistically. Also, late in that game, when they needed a drive to tie things up, Painter and the Colts couldn't convert. The constant cuts to Peyton Manning on the broadcast were so frequent, it was like the 2011 version of Taylor Swift at a Chiefs game, prompting one dedicated user on Reddit to meticulously document the Manning mania versus actual Colts highlights in the highlight clips. With the Colts standing at 0-4 and desperate for a spark, Painter was surprisingly awesome in the first half, throwing for nearly 250 yards and led the Colts to a 24-7 lead. This meant things were going to turn around, right? No. In the second half, things changed dramatically. He produced just 3 completions for 40 yards in the second half. And in a last-ditch attempt to save the game on 4th down, he didn't even throw the ball far enough to get a first down. And believe it or not, this was the high point of the Painter era. Now, to give Curtis Painter the benefit of the doubt to that point, he actually had a pretty decent QB rating and had 4 touchdowns and no picks. However, the biggest issue was his completion percentage. It was clearly affecting this offense's efficiency, especially in the 4th quarter. Now, in his 3rd start, he did improve his completion percentage, but without any Pierre Garçon magic this time around, this game was just pretty mediocre. And this one wasn't all on Painter. The team was just bad all around. But no one remembers this game. And that's because of the humiliation ritual that took place the following week.
They're so sick and tired of hearing that Peyton Manning is a one-man team out here. They just don't buy that, and they would certainly love to prove everybody wrong with a big win over the Saints.
As the top show on all of television, Sunday Night Football averaged over 20 million viewers per week in 2011. And before finding out Peyton Manning was going to miss most of the season, if not all of the season, this was going to be the Super Bowl rematch from 2 years prior. The two teams in 2009 that both went at least 13-0 to start the year. It was supposed to be future Hall of Fame quarterback versus future Hall of Fame quarterback. But instead, we got one of the most humiliating and lopsided games in the history of the NFL.
The play clock is down to 4. And Painter isn't ready for the snap. And the Saints get the first early break.
Even the most optimistic of fans had to have lost all hope midway through this game. It felt like witnessing Alabama play a high school JV squad who was missing half their starters. This was the kind of game where you wish a mercy rule was in place. By the end, the Saints had produced more than double the yards, triple the first downs, and won by a gap of 8 touchdowns over the Colts. Painter looked like he had experienced shell shock. He threw for just 67 yards while committing 2 turnovers. And he was benched for the recently signed Dan Orlovsky with 10 minutes to go. At this point, it's hard to not feel bad for Curtis Painter. I mean, he's just a former 6th round pick who was thrust into this situation, and like many 6th round picks, he struggled. And unlike many 6th round picks, who usually will get pulled by this point, they didn't pull him. In fact, the following week, he started and he threw the ball pretty much more than anyone else in the league that season. Painter threw the ball 49 times. He was coming off a game where he threw for 67 yards and a pick. And they thought to let him throw the ball 49 times? That's just crazy. He was one of just 13 quarterbacks that season to have that many attempts in a game. Despite this many throws, Painter had no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and the Colts were once again blown out. By this point, the debates had begun. Are the Indianapolis Colts losing on purpose? Because when you look at the data, Curtis Painter should have been benched by that point. The team had a backup, Dan Orlovsky, and they were 0-8 and really struggling and could use some spark of life. Yet, they kept the poor guy out there. And once again, in the next game, it was hard to watch. Painter's top highlight was an illegal double pass that you almost never see happen. As the Colts took their 9th straight L, Painter threw for just 98 yards, completing less than half his passes, and the team was blown out once again. And during the broadcast, you could see the fans were beginning to embrace the potential franchise-altering decision coming up.
We're here in Miami. The Dolphins are hosting the Denver Broncos, another contender in the so-called suck for luck competition going on this year.
Is Andrew Luck the best rookie quarterback prospect you've ever seen?
The developing narrative around the future of the quarterback in Indianapolis was bizarre to say the least. For the upcoming 2012 NFL Draft, Andrew Luck was already being hailed as one of the greatest prospects ever. Actually, he was the greatest prospect since Peyton Manning came out of college. He was so hyped up that the media had made it a regular talking point about which of the NFL bottom feeders were going to walk away with the #1 overall pick. Okay, I have a quick personal anecdote to add to the story. So in 2011, in November, I turned 16. And for my 16th birthday, we flew from Idaho to Indianapolis where my family was staying. And from there, we drove to see 2 Ohio State games, which were pretty embarrassing because they lost both games, but that's besides the point. Anyway, so we were in Indianapolis for a few of the days, and when you would walk around the city, there was Peyton Manning standees in different locations. And it was kind of weird because he wasn't playing, the team was terrible and hadn't won a game, and everyone was talking about Andrew Luck being the next quarterback. It was just an odd time. Alright, so with that said, let's go on to Curtis Painter's 7th start. The 2-6 Jags traveled to Indianapolis to have a showdown between Blaine Gabbert and Curtis Painter. They were the two worst quarterbacks statistically in the NFL, and the game played out as you'd expect. The score was 3-3 near the end of the third quarter. During the game, Painter threw 2 brutal interceptions and was benched for Dan Orlovsky, and the Colts went on to lose their 10th straight game. And that was the end of the Curtis Painter. Oh, wait a minute, just kidding. He started again the following week.
All year. The ball is loose. That is a fumble as ruled on the field. He's going deep for Garcon. And it's intercepted.
Although Painter had a rough game, this one came down to the wire. After a miraculous play by Reggie Wayne, Painter had one last chance to at least send the game to overtime for a chance to win. But he threw an interception, dropping the Colts to 0-11. And finally, after this game, the Colts made the decision to bench Curtis Painter for good. For 8 weeks, Curtis Painter started for the Colts, which they lost all 8 games, 5 of which were by double digits, 3 were total blowouts, and 1 was the biggest blowout of the entire season. Honestly, I feel pretty bad for this guy. Back in 2009 during his rookie season, the team was 14-0 with a lead when he went in the game for Peyton Manning, and they lost. And then in 2011, after losing 8 straight games, the team replaced him, and then they won. After the season, the team released him, and because there was a chance Peyton Manning would never play again, they released him as well. Ownership also fired the coaches and front office, with 2012 beginning a whole new era with number 1 overall pick Andrew Luck. For Curtis Painter, he went on to be a practice squad quarterback in 2012 with the Ravens. Then he served as Eli Manning's backup in 2013, which was his final year in the NFL. In some sense, Curtis Painter was the accidental sacrificial lamb to go from Manning to Luck, and he'll always be remembered in infamy, kind of like Nathan Peterman. People have argued over the years whether or not the Colts actually tanked to land Andrew Luck. Seeing them put this poor guy on the field week in and week out gives many casual fans fuel for that argument. The typical perception of Curtis Painter is why I titled this video that way, but when you look into it, it doesn't really make sense, because why would the coaches agree to lose if they were going to get fired? It just doesn't add up.
And that's why it was so interesting, because everybody outside was like, oh, they're sucking for Luck. But then I see you and everybody else celebrating after we win and almost blow it at the end. I was like, I don't know if that is the case in this entire thing.
The reasons the Colts sucked in 2011 probably had less to do with tanking and more to do with the fact that the team was entirely based around Peyton Manning. The team was so dependent on this guy that even though he was going to be out for the majority, if not all, of the 2011 season, they kept him on the active roster, either to basically be another coach, or the off chance that he can somehow play later in the season. And just to try to explain how ill-prepared this team was to lose their quarterback, let me compare them to the 2007-2008 Patriots. The Patriots were fresh off that Super Bowl loss, and in the preseason of 2008, Tom Brady tore his ACL and was going to miss the entire season. With a backup who had never proven himself, the Patriots went 11-5 that season. Obviously, there was a drop-off from Brady to Castle, but they were so much better structured than this Colts team, they were able to still be pretty solid, whereas the Colts completely fell apart. But luckily for the organization, it was right place, right time. If there was ever a time you would move on from a legendary quarterback like Peyton Manning, it would be in the year that people thought he probably could never play again, and you have the number 1 overall pick in a year where there's a legendary all-time quarterback prospect on the way. However, any luck that this team had dried out rather quickly. While Luck proved to be an amazing talent during his NFL career, he was so beaten up that he retired before the age of 30. And for Peyton Manning, well, he didn't retire, he kept playing. And for the Broncos, he was not only good, he was incredible. Manning played 4 more seasons, made 3 Pro Bowls, started in 2 Super Bowls, and he walked away with 1 more ring in his final career game.
Von Miller, 3rd and long 3, going deep. Oh, and he's got Thomas! Goodbye! Touchdown! It's the all-time highest scoring offense in the history of pro football.